so what's the plan? How are we going to get this mushroom? Times are really important, I guess.
We're going to search in the woods where it's usually found.
Alright. So, we're going to search in the woods. We have 20 minutes, so what are we waiting for? Let's go. Where are these woods? Can you take us?
Yes,
Alright, let's go.
Yeah, this one time I was wave boarding up in Oahu, and a man named Jerry comes up to me and says, "Wow, Bear, what great muscles you have." And I was like, "Well, thanks, Jerry." So then I got into a conversation with this gentleman. He asked me about species diversity. And I, me being a wildlife expert, I went up to tell him there's a wide diversity of species in most ecosystems. Each species has its own specific role. That's called a niche. A niche. Ecological niche. Only one species can occupy a niche at one time in a particular ecosystem. Yeah, one time I was rock climbing out in Montana, and then Jim comes up to me and says, "Wow, Bear, you really do seem to win at just about everything you do." And I say, "Why, thanks, Jim. Very kind gentleman." So we started talking, and he asked me, can two populations in the same area occupy the same niche? And I said, "No, Jim, no way. One of them would got to be eliminated." And he's like, "Well, what about the deer and the moose?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a good point, Jim, because the deer and the moose live in the same environment, same ecosystem. They eat somewhat similar foods, but an important thing to be noted is that their diets, their habitats are slightly different, and that is what allows them to survive together." And I went on to tell Jim about how really the only time that a species will be eliminated because of the occupation of the same niche by another species is usually when a foreign species is introduced to the ecosystem. Jim was impressed by that. Yeah, this one time I was tanning out in Barcelona. Love Barcelona. And I was working on the tan on my back. One of the most important parts of tanning. I know about tanning. So I was laying there on my stomach, and there's a man named Nick lying next to me. And he says to me, "Wow, Bear, what a nice butt you have." And I was like, "Well, thanks, Nick." And then we started talking a little bit. We started talking about ecology, believe it or not. And he asked me something about food webs. Me, being the ecological expert I am, I told him that in every ecosystem there is a complex web of interactions between organisms. Nick was like, "Wow, Bear, you sure know your ecosystems." And I was like, "Well, yes, I do. There are certain relationships between two separate organisms. For instance, they could be competitive, in which they both compete for similar foods, territory, resources. They can be cooperative, in which, one species helps out the other species, and then the other species, in return, helps out the first species, so everybody gets along and it's good. There are even some relationships in which one organism can benefit, yet the other organism is not affected at all." And Nick says to me, "Wow, Bear, what a great guy." And I was like, "Well, thanks, Nick. You want to hang out sometime? You know what I'm talking about." Last summer, I went scuba diving in Australia with my friend Josh. So we're underneath the water, looking at all the fish, the coral. We got to the surface, Josh says to me, "Bear, you have some of the nicest legs I've ever seen." And I said, "Well, thanks, Josh. I really appreciate that." So we got talking, and he started to ask me, what are the different roles of species in an ecosystem? And I said, well, there's a few different roles that a species can occupy. Some of them are autotrophs, which means they feed themselves. They get energy from the sunlight, and using photosynthesis, they convert the energy into sugar. These are also known as producers. There are other organisms that are heterotrophs. They acquire their energy by eating other organisms. The heterotrophs can be primary consumers, which would be herbivores, something that eats plants. They could be secondary consumers, known as carnivores, something that eats other consumers. And there would be higher level consumers, which are also carnivores, and they eat other carnivores. So there's different levels in the food web, and each level has its own specific role. So there I was, Switzerland, skiing with my buddy John. We're going down the hill, and then we get to the bottom, time to get back on the lift. I hate the lift personally. I'd rather run up the mountain. So anyway, we're talking. He also complimented me on my agility. I'm quite a nasty skier. And he asked me, sometimes there are discrete roles an organism can play in an ecosystem. And I was like, why yes, John, there are some roles that are quite discrete. One of these would be a parasite, which is an organism that just latches onto another organism and feeds off that organism. Sometimes by sucking its blood, taking other nutrients from it. Parasite usually harms the organism called the host, which it latches onto. But it doesn't want to kill the host, because then the parasite would have to go find somewhere else. Another type of these organisms is a decomposer, which would decompose dead organic material. They're not really considered in the food chain because A, they go after any level, so it would be almost impossible to place them. And B, they only eat things that are already dead. They're also scavengers, which are kind of like decomposers, but they're animal versions, such as a vulture. They also go around looking for dead organisms, which they can eat. Back in tree. I learned a special technique for climbing trees. What you do is you take your shirt or some kind of garment you have, and you can use it to wrap it around the tree, and that way, hold on to something. You know what I'm saying? Climb up the tree, like so. It always gives you a nice little grip. And that way, you can scale a tree that otherwise you might normally not have been able to scale. Pretty good stuff when you think about it. Whoa, whoa, Nelly. It's getting risky. Risky business out here. Gotta keep my whereabouts about me. A little bit mossy. That'll add to the difficulty. But long run, shouldn't need much. So here I am, on top of the tree, which almost just broke and knocked me down. And what I've come to realize is, this forest is being deforested as we speak. So, like I was saying, trees are coming down. This one looks like it was pretty natural causes, Your standard rainstorm, something along those lines. But a good thing about a park like this one, about out in the wild like this one, is the people are planting new trees to replace them, as you can see over there. This is a key part of keeping the forests and the ecosystems healthy, because it allows new organisms to arise, increases some biodiversity. We all like our good old biodiversity. It's just all around good stuff, you know what I'm saying?
Forests, everything everywhere. This is an example of litter and how it is destructive to our environment because it keeps these plants from carrying out photosynthesis.